All right. Well, welcome everybody to Build Good Live. We haven't done these in a while. It's time. It's time to get back to doing some more of this. We've been busy in the background working, but it's always fun when we get to. Sorry, I'm getting a bit of feedback here. When we get to do this today, we've got Ronen Tal from the Nature Conservancy of Canada. We have a little bit of camera issues on his end, so you may be able to see his face a little bit later on. But right now, we're gonna get going. Always be testing. You've likely heard that. It's like common fundraising advice. It's like, oh, you don't know what to do? Well, just test it. Well, yes, but also it's not just as easy as just test it. There's a method to the madness, and sometimes that can be a little bit confusing. But testing is the way that we find new insights to actually grow our fundraising. And Ronen is the director of integrated marketing and fundraising at the Nature Conservancy of Canada, where he stewards a file of about 40,000 donors, raising about $10 million a year. And he's always testing. So, who better to walk us through what this might look like today? So, in today's chat, we're going to get into why you should bother testing in the first place, the benefits of testing, some of the pitfalls, and we'll get into the 5W framework, which you can use to begin some of your own testing. We're going to hand it over to Ronen now. Hey, Ronen.
Hey, Mike, how are you? Thanks for having me today. And everybody, I am sorry about the technical difficulties. I was chatting with Mike just beforehand. Everything was perfect. And then my camera decided didn't want to function. So you're stuck with just my voice today, but there is this lovely deck that I've brought for us to talk about. Like Mike said, we're going to talk about effective A/B testing in fundraising, or how I learned to stop guessing and leverage the results for those Doctor Strangelove fans out there. So today, we're going to talk about, just so you know about my background. Mike, you can go on if you want. So a bit about me. I've been fundraising for just over 13 years now. Like most people, I ended up here by accident. Never had grand ambitions of being a fundraiser. I actually started off my professional career as a management consultant, working with creative firms like architecture firms, design firms, focused on succession planning, and ended up in fundraising almost by accident, and have been around the block, so to speak, doing telemarketing agencies, working with face-to-face agencies, direct response and multi-channel agencies, as well as a number of nonprofits. Currently running the integrated marketing team at Nature Conservancy of Canada. Seeing a couple other enviros on the thread, always good to see. So today, what are we going to talk about? We're going to talk about effective A/B testing approach. We're going to talk about what is testing, why do we test, and the model my teams use. And the outcomes that you're going to hopefully come out of today is that you're able to strategically identify where tests are appropriate for you, and you're able to effectively set up any test for your organization to pursue. So, what is a test? What is testing overall? It is important for us to get started. Before we get into A/B testing, I really just want to set the groundwork of what we're even talking about. So, a test is trying something new and measuring those results. You test because there's a goal to eventually change something based on that test. We don't just test on a whim. We're looking for something to change. It's not just something we do for fun, even though tests can be fun. You should have a desired outcome in mind, something that you're hoping to do differently. There are a lot of different types of tests. A/B test being one of them, but you also have longitudinal studies. You have multivariate testing. Literally, the options are limitless. We're going to focus today on just strict A/B testing and the scientific method that it employs. So, for those of you who remember your grade 7 through 9 science classes, the scientific method is you state a hypothesis, something that you think will happen if another outcome occurs, another factor is changed, and then you measure what happens when you change that one thing. That is it. And if you do that right, there's no such thing as a failed A/B test. Because if you have stated correctly what you think will happen, your hypothesis, and you know what aspect you are trying to change to achieve that outcome, even if you don't hit your target result, you have learned something. So A/B tests that do not achieve their desired outcome still give you a ton of new information. So moving on, why bother with this testing? Well, there are benefits and pitfalls with testing. Mike, if you want to just go on there. The benefits here really is that this has a huge impact with relatively low risk. And it is the opportunity to stack gains. What I mean by this is that A/B tests can be done with relatively low risk of all kinds. It can be done relatively cheaply, so the financial risk is low. It can also be done with only certain audiences, so you can mitigate the risk of your donor experience, only expose some people to a new element if you're not sure how they're going to respond to it. And stacking gains allows you to exponentially achieve greater results than the sum of a test parts. So if you combine results from multiple tests, you get a greater result. For example, if you run an email click-through test and you find something that gets you a better click-through rate, and then in a separate test, you're also testing your donation form for like an ask string to figure out how people can give you more. If you combine those two, you're now driving more people to a form and ask them for more money that is being effective. You're able to get more than the sum of those two tests combined. And that's really when you start to see big results. But like most things, this can go wrong. And testing mostly goes wrong when it's poorly planned. So I really want to repeat this point. Earlier, I said there's no such thing as a failed A/B test. That's true when it's planned right. But when it's not planned correctly, and why we're talking today about the 5Ws model, it leads organizations to make wrong decisions. And a wrong decision in a test can have massive consequences to either your budget, your donor base growth, really anything. So it's important that you set it up correctly. But if you do, this is one of your most powerful tools. Mike, you want to move us on to the 5Ws model, please? And again, sorry, everybody, there is some technical issues here. Mike is very kindly running my slideshow for me since the screen share function is being a bit difficult today. So we're going to go on to the 5Ws model. And this is just a model that I've used with most of my teams for the past, I'd say, 8 or so years. And it's got 5 components. Mike, if you want to go on. It's the same components that, again, you learned in grade school with basic English structure. It's the who, what, where, when, and why. But don't forget the how. This is a really simple and flexible model that covers all the key information that you need to build a test. And in this section, we're going to go over what those pieces of information you actually need to set up your test are. So let's look at those in a bit more detail. Who? Who is the audience you are targeting? Are they prospects? Are they existing donors? People that you know? Digital leads? Really be specific here. Who are you talking to? What? This is the collateral messaging. It's the thing they are actually getting, whether it's in print, email, on the phone, whatever. What are they getting? And this is also where you say what they're getting that is different. What is the test aspect of this particular test? The where is both geography, where is the who, where do they reside, but also the channel. Are you doing this online? Email, phone, direct mail. Make sure you be as specific as possible the channels that you are using. And the when is this test going to run? Is it time bound or is it open-ended? How long are you going to measure it for? And finally, the why. Why are we doing this? What is the purpose for running this test? i.e., what is the outcome you're trying to achieve? If you answer these, you're well on your way to setting up any campaign, but especially a test. There is one more piece here. We'll come to in a second. First, though, I want to show you a real-life example. This form that will appear next is an actual example of the 5 W's in action. It's a form that I use with my teams right now, where for every campaign that we run, they fill this out. And it's small boxes, so they're not writing huge essays, but they're saying who they're targeting, what they're sending them, where it's going to be, when it's happening, and why they are sending that piece of collateral. It keeps it objective. It forces them to articulate their thoughts, and it keeps us held to account for the actual results that follow. The other thing it does is, because it's written down, it lets you share it with other stakeholders. We get a lot of alignment across the organization, with vendors even, make sure everybody is singing from the same song sheet because it's written down. We'll talk about that more as well. But there was a sixth part that I said is very important, the how. So the how really comes into play for your A/B tests, because the first 5 W's kind of give the context for the test, but the how answers the question that surrounds the test itself. The how identifies the mechanism that will improve the results, and it realizes the results from why. It's unique to tests. If you're just setting up your 5 W's for any campaign, which is a good practice, you don't need the how. If you're running a test, you absolutely need to articulate how this test is going to drive that result. Because without knowing it, you cannot run an effective test. We're going to get into a couple case studies that actually show this model in action. But beforehand, I do want to take a second here and just talk a bit about the importance of documentation. You've heard me say it a couple times so far that we write these things down. And the reason for documenting these things is basically because we're really bad at managing ourselves as humans. We are prone to all kinds of cognitive biases, and we misremember things. Not intentionally, it's just how our brains are wired. So writing this stuff down, framing the test at the outset, it mitigates those cognitive biases, and it creates an objective history that we can go back to. When you write it down, it lets you pressure test your ideas. Does it even make sense? Sometimes things sound good in our head or even in discussions, and you have to write it down, and you say to yourself, that doesn't make any sense. So writing it down forces you to have that moment where you're thinking to yourself, is this a good idea? And then at the end of the test, if you've written down those objectives, the purposes, you can actually measure it effectively instead of fitting the results to fit your narrative. We humans have this wonderful ability to take the results and then tell ourselves after the fact, oh yeah, that's what I thought would happen, or this makes sense because of that. And this holds us to account. So that was my big spiel at the front end. Now I have brought a couple case studies to look through with everyone here that will demonstrate how this 5 W's model actually sets up A/B tests in real life. I will note the numbers themselves are fictional, but the tests themselves are real. So these are real examples of how the A/B test was done, how the 5 W's was used or not used effectively. And just the numbers have been slightly adjusted. We'll look at one analog case and one digital as well to cover a couple of different channels. So let's look at the first one. The first one involves an outer envelope test. In this package, we're talking about a organization's house mailing. So they were sending it to existing donors, and the organization was seeking more revenue. They had, for all intents and purposes, an effective existing package. It had a 4-page letter, an insert, coupon. It was doing pretty well. But the organization thought the number 10 white outer envelope was stale. Stop me if you've heard that one before. So they decided, okay, let's try a new visual look for this test, with the goal of increasing their revenue. these were the starting parameters of the test. Before the next slide, I'm going to wait a minute here. If anybody wants to participate, go get a pen and paper, because on the 5 W's for this test that we're about to see, there is a large error, and we'll see if you can spot it. So we'll take 15 seconds here. If you want to participate, go get yourself a pen and paper. I will hold on. Okay, Mike, let's go on to the next slide. So for this outer envelope test, here were the 5 W's as done by the organization at the time. The who.
While everyone is grabbing pen and a paper, you can feel free to drop your questions.
Sorry, Mike, what was that? I think there's a bit of a lag here. Am I back? Can someone tell me if I'm back? Mike? Okay. I'm going to keep going. Okay, I'm back. Thank you, Becky. Thank you. Okay. So, who? The organization decided this was a house direct mail audience, existing donors who were already giving to the organization. What they got was the spring house mailing package, a craft envelope versus a number 10. That also is the test. The existing number 10 versus a new craft envelope. Where? It's going to be across Canada, direct mail only. And again, we're talking about both geography and channel. When was this going to happen? In spring of that year, with a 90-day tail. And again, they're noting the time-bound nature of that test. And why was that A/B test being done? To determine if the new outer envelope, that new craft envelope, drives more revenue. So, take 30 seconds. See if you can spot the error in the 5 W's here. Then we'll look at the results. Okay, let's go on and look at the results then. Hopefully you've all written down your guess. So, the results. And hopefully Mike is still sharing his screen, able to move on to the next slide. But I'll start talking. Overall, the control group generated a few more gifts of a slightly higher response rate, a slightly lower average gift, and a bit less net revenue. The test package had a slightly lower response rate, but overall more revenue because of the higher average gift. So the recommendation was made by the vendor to utilize the test package. What went wrong here? So let's go ahead and spot the problem on the next slide. The recommendation to use the test package was driven by the net revenue. If you remember, the why of the 5 W's was to determine if the new OE drives more revenue. That was it. In this case, what is driving higher net revenue? The test package got fewer responses and a lower response rate. What's driving that higher net revenue is a higher average gift. fewer gifts at a higher value gets to more net revenue. Okay. So then what drives the higher average gift in this test? And a way to think about that is really what drives average gift in general. What tends to drive average gift in general is either a donor's past giving or what they're asked for. The control in the test here did not differentiate what they were asking for. The test was on the outer envelope. So what is the relationship between the test and the outcomes here in terms of average gift, that outcome that's driving the higher net revenue? I would argue there is none. That the average gift is independent of what the test was. And when I came into that organization after this test had been done, we actually looked back at this test months after it had been completed. And when we unpacked the data, we saw that the test group, on average, their previous last gift was a few dollars higher than the control group. And so if you're running a basic upgrade matrix, asking people to give a bit more than their last gift, and one group on average has given a bit more previously, then they're going to get asked for more on the current coupon. And thus they are going to give more. And really the error on this test was that the how was not written out. It did not articulate why we would get more net revenue off the new test envelope. So let's rebuild the 5 W's the right way, because they're mostly right. But it's that last little bit that falls apart. So if we look at our new 5 W's, who is still the house direct mail audience? The what is the spring house mailing package still sending a craft envelope versus a number 10. The where remains the same. It's across Canada and it's direct mail only. Spring also remains the same. The when, it's in spring of that year with a 90-day tail. But the why changes to now say it's to determine if the new outer envelope leads to a higher response rate. And the how articulates that a different look and feel to the outer envelope leads to more people actually looking at it. And more people look at it, then they open the package. And by having more people opening the package, you get more responses, a higher response rate. This would be a good test. I'm going to go on to the second case study here. And I'm sure we'll talk about this more after we're done. But let's look at the second case study, which is a digital study. We're looking at the optimization of a donation form. Different organization, different time. But for this organization, online revenue was gaining importance, and traffic to their donation form was increasing. Their current conversion rate of people who visited the form and those who actually donated was on par with North American benchmark. They had an open text field at the bottom of their form where people could make comments to the organization. It could be literally anything. The comments created additional work and noise in the CRM. It had to be imported, put into Razor's Edge. It's not clear what was actually happening with it. So it was nice, but not actually an effective piece in the org's mind. So the organization thought that if we're not really using this thing effectively and it's just creating difficulties on our end, it's also an extra field for donors to fill out, which those of you who are digital experts will know can cause friction and reduce the conversion rate. So the test was to remove the text box in order to increase the conversion rate by removing friction. So let's look at our 5 W's that were developed for that test. So our who in this test was potential online donors, visitors to the online donation form. The what was the main donation form with versus without a comment box. Again, being very clear what people are seeing and what the test aspect is. Where was just the main donation form for one-time gifts only. It was not affecting the tribute panel. It was not affecting any ads, the monthly gift, just a one-time donor on the main donation form. The when is interesting. So This happened over a 3-month window for both the test and the control groups, but they were separate windows. This was not a head-to-head A/B test. The organization at this time lacked the tool to run a dynamic A/B test. By that I mean a visitor would go to the donation form and would randomly get either the control or the test form. They couldn't do that live. So instead, they took one 3-month chunk and sent them to the regular control form and then had those results. Then the next 3 months, they ran just the new form and measured those results head to head. Why they did this was to reduce friction for donors and thus increase the conversion rate. And how they thought that would function was that by removing the open text box, it reduces a decision point for the visitors, which should result in a higher conversion rate. So we've got our 5 W's, we've got our how. Let's look at the results here and what happened. So for the control, there were 1,360 visitors who made 268 gifts with a conversion rate of 19.7%. On the test form, you had slightly higher, more visitors of 1,644 visitors, making 315 gifts, a conversion rate of 19.2%. Unlike the direct mail study, when we took the same audience, split them in half, A/B, classic, and sent it out, here it was over 3 months and then another 3 months. So during those periods of time, you get a different number of visitors based on what's happening in the market with advertising, awareness campaigns, anything. And that's why you have a different number of visitors for the control versus test. And interestingly here, the test failed to drive the hypothesized results. The control with the comment box got a higher conversion rate. However, it was really challenging to measure because of the different timelines. And what happens in, say, winter versus summer, you get a very different type of visitor. So the organization was unsure what to do with that aspect. There was also the outcome that removing the text box made it easier for the database team to actually manage the gifts that were imported, made it simpler for the organization to import data cleanly and process those gifts. Some other things also happened that were unexpected. During the period of the test, looking at some additional results here, some stakeholders internally to the organization, mostly planned gift officers and some major gift officers, reached out to the donor services team and said, hey, where did all of the comments go? We would get, a smattering of people commenting that they want to get information about gifts and wills, or they really want to support a specific project. This had not been communicated to the donor services team, who were just completely unaware of it. Same with the digital fundraising team. It was not a frequent occurrence, but it was highly valuable information. Any of you who do planned giving fundraising or major gift fundraising, you know how valuable those leads are. So this was a problem that emerged unexpectedly that the organization had to deal with. Ultimately, what they decided to do was extend the test to get greater clarity on the results. They wanted to see, would these conversion rates hold over a longer period of time, and try and actually get a better comparison of apples to apples of similar timeframes in a year. So still running that test. But the organization did decide to make it clearer how donors could reach the donor services team and request information on major or planned giving products. So putting the number to donor services on the form and on some coupons and other places on the website mostly. It's a bit of an unsatisfying end to an A/B test. There's no clear conclusion there, but the organization was able to reach what I think is an effective outcome because they articulated the why and the how so clearly about what they thought the comment box removal would do. Those are our two case studies. I'm going to wrap up real shortly and take some questions, but I want to give a quick note about statistical significance. We haven't talked about that yet today, and that's intentional. Statistical significance is a great tool. It is also a single tool. It does not answer the why or the how of a test or a package performing. It just tells you that if you run this enough times, 95% of the time, the outcome that happened here is going to happen again, but does not answer why or how. It's on you as fundraisers to still apply your critical thinking to the test results. And I'll go back to that outer envelope test, case study 1. I told you already that I have adjusted the final results from what they really were. But in reality, the test results of the outer envelope package were found to be statistically significant. And that was also influencing the vendor's recommendation to drive, to use a craft envelope on everything at huge cost to the organization. But it wasn't valid. It did not explain why people were giving more per gift. So it was a piece of the puzzle, and it's worth looking at. Is your audience large enough? Is the outcome here statistically significant? But it is not the be all and end all of a test. You still need to make sure you understand it. And if you don't, run the test again until you can hypothesize what's happening and you understand what lever you are pulling on. That's my tangent on statistical significance. So let's wrap up today with a couple takeaways for you all. Hopefully you can use as you go back to your organizations. First key takeaway, testing's great when planned correctly. I've shown you one model today, 5Ws model. There are others out there. The important thing is that you are planning your test and you then understand the outcome and are able to measure it objectively. I like the 5Ws model because it's flexible. It lets you get all of the pertinent information that you need in a simple, digestible manner. And always, always apply your own critical thinking. Think hard, pressure test it, and then come up with your own outcome. That's it for me today. I want to thank you all for coming and listening to me talk about tests and our approach that my teams use. I am happy to stay on here and take questions for as long as people want to ask them. And my contact information here is on the final slide. Mike and Becky, Mike can share it after. Just wait to get my camera back on. That would be lovely, but I can't get my camera back.
That's okay. You've got me now. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Awesome. If there are any questions, I'm seeing questions in the chat. If you have questions, drop them in. We'll call them out. First question we've got is from Julia. She says, if you're looking into doing multiple tests, how would you recommend prioritizing which tests are the best ones to start with? That's a really good question.
Great question. And there should be lots of tests. It's going to depend, Julia, on what are your goals. I'll speak right now. My role at Nature Conservancy of Canada, we're on a growth trajectory, and our growth strategy is contingent on driving the volume of donors into our community pretty aggressively. So I've got my team right now focusing on tests that can achieve that result of more donors. I'm less focused right now on tests that increase average gift value right now because we're trying to build the community more. So I would look back at your strategic plan. What is your goal? What is your organization's goal? What levers can you pull on that would get you closer to target, and test things in that domain?
Yeah, I think that's a good recommendation. Thanks, Ronen. We've got another question from Caitlin, and Caitlin is actually calling out a question that I had as well. She's wondering what audience size makes the most sense for a test. If an organization only has a list of 1,000 people, is it worth trying?
Short answer is yes. Again, the rule of thumb that a lot of agencies will give you here is that 5,000 makes up a good enough sample size, and that it's a good place to start. Not everybody has 10,000 donors in their donor base. So does that mean you're not supposed to test until you get to 10,000? That would rule out testing for so many nonprofits. So no, this is exactly why I focus on this model and your own critical thinking, because it gets you less dependent on a statistically significant number of participants. So I really don't think there is a minimum number you need. The larger the sample size is, the better, the more robust your findings, and the more significant the results would be. But you can test with anything. Just recognize that if you're putting a sample size of 1 against a sample size of 10, you really can't think that's going to happen continuously moving forward. You do need to test it again and again and again until you can get enough of a sample size.
Yeah, that's very true. We've run tests on donor files of 25,000 before, and the results have come back statistically insignificant because it's 50-50. So sometimes even if you do have a large sample size, you might not get the result you're looking for.
Yeah.
Andreas has an interesting follow-up question there. After identifying a winning variant, how do you implement those findings into future campaigns? Do you just assume that that's the way you should be progressing from now on?
I mean, that goes back to the benefits, right? Stacking those gains and making things better. Broadly speaking, if it fits into why you thought the test would work and the how makes sense, yeah, apply it. So for example, let's say you have run a ask matrix test where you've anchored your 3 gift ideas at a higher point to measure if people would give it a higher value without sacrificing response rate, and you see that happened, roll it out to your other similar packages. If you do that on a prospect package, do it on your other prospect packages. If you did it on a house package, do it on your other house packages. Where I'd be careful is applying one result, say a digital outcome, to an analog channel, because donors respond differently to different channels, as different donor types respond differently. So something that a mid-level donor likes might not work for a prospect donor. So apples to apples, you can apply them as long as the results make sense to your why and how. When you go into a new audience, generally I'd recommend testing it. But if you have a good enough data set and a good enough rationale, you can occasionally just apply your critical thinking and just go for it. But that requires a bit more comfort with your data set and your own experience.
Yeah, there's a lot that you packed into there, but what I really want to call out is just this idea that testing against different segments, different audiences, that has to be thought through in a different way, right? Because you can't just test the same thing for a lapsed donor as you would for a monthly donor. Maybe you can, but might want to think about that a little bit more.
And I see that, if I can just add to that one.
Yeah, go ahead.
Andreas asked a question about fitting your audience there. We'll come to that later on. But if you like the result of one thing, say prospect, and then you want to go apply elsewhere, you don't have to do 50-50. You could take the results and just put it against 3/4 of the audience, 80%, whatever, and hedge your bets that way as well.
That's a really good suggestion. Yeah, that feels a little bit safer.
Yeah.
Last question, I think, is all we have time for, and that's from Trisha. What tools, Ronen, do you recommend for doing A/B tests on the web or digitally?
That's a really broad question, Trisha. I'm honestly not sure what you're referring to in terms of emails or advertising or search. Those are all different digital channels, but I'd suggest that you can get in touch with me after if I can understand your question a bit better and point you in the right direction with some stuff there.
That's generous, Ronen. Thanks. Mike's back. Hi.
Well, thank you, everyone. I think we fixed the lag. We weren't able to fix Ronen's camera, but maybe next time. Trisha, there's a tool you may want to check out called VWO, which is a tool that we use. It's very helpful to set up tests. But that's or you could reach out to Ronen and myself as well. after.
I'll echo that.
Yeah.
We are using VWO here as well now for our dynamic tests on our donation forms.
Yeah, so Tricia says showing different pages on the website. VWO is a very good bet for that. You can also very easily set up variations of the page right within VWO. So check out that tool, and happy to share our experience with it. I'm sure Ronen is happy to share his experience with VWO as well. Thank you, everyone, for coming to this free training. Thanks, Ronen. We're going to figure out some tech details, and maybe we'll do this again. But we are soft launching the Build Good Summit, and Ronen is going to be one of the speakers at the Build Good Summit. It's happening next year, May 21st to 23rd, in Toronto. Ronen, if people want to find you, where can they get in touch with you?
Oh, there's two great locations. It was the last slide, but I don't know if people saw it. LinkedIn's always a safe bet. Ronen Tal, CFRE is how you can find me on LinkedIn. And there's also my personal email, ronen.y.tal@gmail.com. I can't type right now to the public chat, but maybe Becky or Mike can put that email there if people want to reach out.
Yeah, we're going to do that right now. Thank you, Becky, for jumping in and saving the stream.
Anytime. Happy to do it.
It should be in the chat right now, Ronen's LinkedIn and email address. Thanks, everyone, for coming to Build Good Live, and we will see you on